It was supposed to be the most magnificent night Lagos had ever seen. A billionaire's estate in Banana Island, glowing like a constellation fallen to earth, champagne flowing from crystal fountains, cameras flashing as Nigeria's elite celebrated an opulence that would make kings jealous. But in one moment, everything shattered. A sound echoed through the marble corridors that would bring an empire crumbling down. A slap. One single slap. And the woman who received it would do something that no one, not the billionaire, not his army of lawyers, not even the entire nation watching, could have predicted. What happened next didn't just shock Nigeria. It exposed the kind of truth that powerful men spend fortunes to bury, the kind that makes governments tremble and dynasties fall. This is the story of Amara Okafor, a 29-year-old maid who worked in the shadows of one of Africa's wealthiest men, and Chief Emeka Okonkwo, a 65-year-old billionaire whose face graced Forbes Africa, whose name commanded respect in every boardroom from Lagos to London, whose charitable foundation fed thousands across the continent. On the surface, he was untouchable, beloved, revered as a symbol of African excellence. But behind those golden gates, a different man existed, and Amara saw him. She saw everything. For 8 months, she cleaned his floors, served his guests, and kept her head bowed until the night of September 21st, 2024, when the mask fell and the world saw what she had been enduring all along. But here's the question nobody could answer in those first chaotic hours after the video spread like wildfire across social media. Who was Amara Okafor really? And why did one slap ignite an inferno that would dismantle a billion-dollar empire, expose decades of corruption reaching the highest levels of government, and force an entire nation to confront a question it had been avoiding? How much are we willing to ignore when wealth and power were the face of success? Amara Okafor grew up in a small village in Enugu State, the kind of place where red earth roads turned to mud in the rainy season, and everyone knew your family's history going back 3 generations. Her father had been a teacher, a respected man who believed education was the pathway to dignity. But when Amara was 13, he died suddenly from malaria that went untreated too long, leaving her mother, Ngozi, to raise 4 children on what she could make selling Accra and puff-puff by the roadside. Amara was the eldest daughter. She learned early that life was not about fairness but about survival, that hard work didn't guarantee success, and that sometimes you had to swallow your pride and your dreams just to keep your siblings fed. By the time she was 16, she was hawking sachet water in Lagos traffic, saving every naira she could continue her secondary school education at night. She was brilliant. Her teacher said so. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer, of standing in courtrooms defending people who had no voice, no power, no hope. She could see it so clearly, herself in a black robe, speaking truth to power, making her father proud from whatever realm ancestors watched from. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her mother fell sick. Not malaria this time, but something the village healers couldn't name and the local clinic couldn't treat. By the time they got her to a proper hospital in Enugu, the doctor said it was advanced diabetes with complications. The medical bills were staggering, numbers that made Amara's head spin. She dropped out of school 3 months before her final exams, picked up more jobs, any jobs, washing clothes, cleaning compounds, braiding hair until her fingers ached. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough when poverty has its teeth in you. Her younger brother, Chidi, dropped out to become an Okada rider. Her sisters stopped going to school to help their mother at the roadside stall. And Amara, exhausted and desperate, heard about a job through a church member, a job in Lagos working for a very important man, a job that paid more in 1 month than she'd made in a year. She took it without hesitation. Chief Emeka Okonkwo's mansion wasn't just a house. It was a statement, a monument to success, 20 bedrooms, an Olympic-sized pool with imported Italian tiles, a garage that housed 12 luxury cars including 2 Rolls-Royces and a limited edition Bugatti. The chandeliers were from Austria, the furniture from France, the art on the walls worth more than most Nigerians would earn in 10 lifetimes. At first, it felt like a blessing. The salary was better than anything Amara had imagined. She had her own small room in the boys' quarters, 3 meals a day, and enough left over to send money home every month to pay for her mother's medication and her siblings' school fees. Chief Okonkwo himself was rarely around, and when he seemed pleasant enough, always dressed impeccably in traditional Igbada or expensive suits, always smiling for the cameras, always generous with greetings delivered in that booming voice that commanded attention. But Amara wasn't naive. She'd been poor long enough to know that rich people showed different faces to different audiences. The face they showed the world, polished and gracious, and the face they showed those who served them, the real face. For the first few months, she kept her head down and her mouth shut. She learned the rhythms of the house, the unspoken rules. You didn't speak unless spoken to. You didn't make eye contact with guests. You moved through rooms like a ghost, present but invisible, efficient but silent. The other staff members, mostly from humble backgrounds like herself, were kind but guarded. They'd all seen things, heard things. There was an unspoken code in that house. You didn't ask questions. You didn't repeat what you witnessed. You smiled when required, worked when commanded, and above all, you stayed invisible. Amara excelled at invisibility. She'd been practicing it her whole life. But she was also observant, cursed with a sharp mind that noticed patterns, inconsistencies, contradictions. She noticed the late-night meetings in Chief's study, important men arriving without security announcing them, conversations conducted in hushed tones that stopped the moment she entered to serve drinks. She noticed the documents left carelessly on his desk, financial statements with numbers that didn't quite add up, bank transfers to accounts with strange names, ledgers showing donations that somehow never matched what the newspapers reported. She noticed the envelopes, thick ones, passed discreetly to men in expensive Igbadas, politicians whose faces she recognized from television. She noticed the way certain phone calls made Chief's voice change, becoming sharp, threatening, a tone he never used in public. She didn't say anything. What could she say? Who would believe a village girl with incomplete secondary education over one of Africa's most celebrated philanthropists? But she remembered. She always remembered. Chief Emeka Okonkwo was 65 years old and had built his fortune through real estate, oil, and telecommunications. The official story was inspiring. A poor boy from a small village who worked his way through university, made his first million before 30, and became a billionaire by 50. His company, Okonkwo Industries, owned hotels, shopping malls, office complexes, and had investments across West Africa. He sat on the boards of 3 universities. He'd built hospitals in rural communities. His foundation, the Okonkwo Foundation for African Excellence, provided scholarships to thousands of underprivileged students, funded women's empowerment programs, and built schools in areas where children studied under trees. The media loved him. He was regularly featured in business magazines as a symbol of what Africans could achieve. Presidents consulted him. Foreign investors courted him. He spoke at global conferences about poverty alleviation and sustainable development. His TED Talk on African entrepreneurship had been viewed millions of times. But the people who worked for him knew a different chief, Okonkwo. The staff whispered stories in the kitchen late at night when the supervisors had retired, stories they'd never tell outsiders. A cook fired for putting too much pepper in his soup. A driver dismissed because Chief's favorite radio station wasn't preset when he entered the car. A housekeeper who was pregnant sent away without her final wages when her condition began to show. Chief didn't yell often, but when he did, it was volcanic. He expected perfection, demanded absolute loyalty, and tolerated no mistakes. A wrinkle in his shirt, dust on a picture frame, ice that wasn't cold enough in his drink, any of these could trigger his rage. Amara had been careful. For 8 months, she'd followed every rule, anticipated his needs, stayed out of his sight as much as possible. She'd witnessed his temper directed at others, the cold fury in his eyes, the cutting words designed to humiliate, but she'd never been on the receiving end. Until the night that changed everything. September 21st, 2024. Chief Okonkwo's 65th birthday celebration. The event had been planned for 6 months, and no expense had been spared. The guest list read like Nigeria's who's who: senators, governors, Nollywood stars, musicians, business moguls, traditional rulers in full regalia, diplomats, and several guests who'd flown in from Europe and America. The compound had been transformed into something from a fantasy. White and gold everywhere, live band playing high-life classics, ice sculptures of eagles, champagne towers that sparkled under string lights, security so tight that even invited guests had to pass through 3 checkpoints. Amara was assigned to work the main marquee, an enormous air-conditioned tent with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Her job was straightforward. Circulate with trays of champagne and small chops, keep glasses filled, smile politely, stay invisible. She'd done this at smaller parties before. This was just bigger, louder, more cameras, more eyes watching. Everything was going perfectly until around 9:30 p.m. Amara was near the main stage, refilling glasses, when she noticed a commotion. One of the guests, a woman dripping in diamonds and designer lace, was laughing loudly, clearly drunk. She stumbled, nearly falling, and Amara instinctively moved forward to help steady her. "Thank you, my dear," the woman slurred, leaning heavily on Amara's arm. Amara smiled, tried to ease the woman back toward her seat, but as she turned, someone bumped into her from behind. The tray tilted, just slightly, just enough. A champagne flute fell, spilling its golden contents down the front of the woman's expensive asobi. Time seemed to stop. The woman gasped dramatically, looking down at her dress as if she'd been doused in acid. People nearby turned to look. Cameras swiveled in their direction. "I'm so sorry, Ma," Amara said immediately, her heart hammering. She grabbed napkins, trying to help, trying to fix it. "Please, I'm very sorry. It was an accident." The woman waved her off, laughing it away. "It's fine, my dear. Accidents happen. Don't worry." Amara thought that was the end of it. She was already mentally thanking God, already moving to step away when she felt a hand grip her arm, hard, fingers digging in her flesh like claws. She turned and found herself face to face with Chief Okonkwo. His eyes were blazing with fury. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle twitching. And in that moment, she saw it, the real man, the one the cameras never captured. "You foolish girl," he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "Sir, I'm sorry, it was—" She didn't get to finish. Chief Okonkwo's hand came up fast, and before she could react, before she could even register what was happening, he slapped her across the face with such force that her head snapped to the side. The sound echoed through the marquee like a gunshot. The music stopped. Conversations died. 200 people turned to stare. Amara's cheek exploded in pain. Her ear rang. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, one hand slowly rising to touch her burning face, her eyes wide with shock. And in that frozen moment, with hundreds of eyes watching, with dozens of phones already recording, Chief Emeka Okonkwo seemed to realize what he'd done. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Fear? Regret? But then it was gone, replaced by the mask, the smile, the charm. He straightened his igbata, cleared his throat, and said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "Clumsy girl, you need to be more careful." Then he turned and walked away, laughing with a senator as if nothing had happened. But the phones were already out. The videos were already uploading. And within minutes, Nigeria knew what he'd done. By midnight, the video had been viewed 15 million times. By sunrise, it had spread across every social media platform, every WhatsApp group, every online forum. The hashtag Justice for Mara was trending #1 in Nigeria, and had spread to Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, and beyond. People were outraged. Celebrities condemned him. Activists called for his arrest. Women's groups organized protests. His company's stock plummeted. International partners began issuing statements about reviewing their relationships with Okonkwo Industries. The video was clear, devastating. You could see everything. Chief Okonkwo grabbing Amara, the slap, her head snapping back, the blood on her lip, the shock in her eyes. And you could hear it, that sickening sound of flesh on flesh, followed by the collective gasp of the crowd. Nigeria opted. Chief Okonkwo's publicist went into crisis mode. Within hours, he issued a statement, carefully worded by expensive PR consultants. He claimed the stress of the event, perhaps too much to drink, deeply regretted his actions, was seeking counseling, and wanted to make amends. His lawyers reached out to Amara immediately. They offered her a settlement, a generous one, 5 million naira, enough to change her life completely, pay for her mother's treatment, send all her siblings to good schools, maybe even start a small business. All she had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement, accept his apology publicly, and disappear from the story. Most people in her position would have taken it. Most people would have seen that money as a miracle, a way out of poverty, a chance at a better life. But Amara didn't take it. The morning after the party, Amara didn't show up for work. The other staff assumed she'd been fired or paid off. But she'd done neither. She'd gone back to her small room in the boys' quarters, locked the door, and sat on her narrow bed, her face still swollen, her mind racing. For 8 months, she'd been invisible. For 8 months, she'd seen things, heard things, noticed things that didn't add up. And she'd stayed quiet because what choice did a poor village girl have against a billionaire? But now something had shifted. The video had made her visible. The world was watching, and she had a choice. She could take the money, sign the papers, go back to her village and try to forget. Or she could speak up, risk everything, and see if truth mattered more than power. Amara thought about her father, the teacher who believed in justice and dignity. She thought about her mother, who'd worked herself sick trying to keep the family together. She thought about her siblings. What kind of example would she be setting for them? And then she thought about all the other people like her, the invisible ones, the maids and drivers and cooks and gate men who endured abuse because they needed the money, who stayed silent, because speaking up meant losing everything. She made her decision. For 8 months, Amara hadn't been as invisible as everyone thought. She'd been watching, listening, and learning. And she'd been doing something else, something that would change everything. She'd been taking photographs. Not of Chief Okonkwo's family or private moments. Nothing invasive or personal. But of documents left carelessly on his desk. Of bank statements and financial records that didn't match the foundation's public reports. Of ledgers showing donations that never reached their destinations. Of emails displayed on his laptop screen during late-night work sessions when he'd call her to serve him tea. She hadn't fully understood what she was looking at initially. Her education had been interrupted, but she was smart enough to recognize when numbers didn't add up, when patterns seemed wrong, when something smelled like corruption. And now, with Nigeria watching, with the world attention briefly focused on her story, she had evidence of something much bigger than a slap. 3 days after the incident, Amara contacted someone she'd only known through television. Zainab Muhammad, an investigative journalist famous for exposing corrupt politicians and fraudulent pastors. Zainab had built a reputation for fearlessness, for taking on powerful people and refusing to be intimidated. Zainab had been following the slap story like everyone else, sympathizing with Amara, but expecting it to fade like most viral controversies do. She didn't expect what Amara brought to their secret meeting in a modest hotel room in Ikeja. A phone filled with photographs. Hundreds of them. Bank statements, transfer receipts, foundation accounts, donor lists, emails, text messages, documents that told a story of systematic fraud spanning over 15 years. Chief Okonkwo's celebrated foundation, the one that had supposedly educated thousands and built dozens of schools, was largely a facade. Millions of naira and dollars donated by well-meaning Nigerians and international organizations had been diverted into offshore accounts, shell companies, and Chief's personal investments. The scholarships he boasted about, most were fake, names on lists of students who didn't exist or who'd received a fraction of the promised amount. The schools he claimed to build, many were half-finished structures abandoned once the publicity photos had been taken. The hospital equipment he donated, purchased at inflated prices from companies he secretly owned, with the difference pocketed. The foundation was a money laundering operation disguised as charity, and Amara had the proof. Zainab spent 2 weeks verifying everything, working with forensic accountants, legal experts, and former Okonkwo Industries employees who'd been too afraid to speak out before. Every document checked out. Every allegation was supported by evidence. And then, on October 10th, 2024, Zainab published the story. The headline read, "The Billionaire's Lie: How Chief Okonkwo Built an Empire on Stolen Charity." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The EFCC launched an investigation. The Corporate Affairs Commission froze the foundation's accounts. Chief Okonkwo's board of directors began resigning en masse. International partners suspended contracts. Banks that had proudly displayed his photograph in their promotional materials quietly removed them. Protests erupted outside his Banana Island mansion. University students whose scholarships had never materialized marched with placards. Communities that had been promised schools but received nothing blockaded his company's offices. Civil society organizations demanded his arrest. And Amara Okafor, the poor maid who'd been slapped on camera, became the whistleblower who'd exposed one of Nigeria's biggest fraud scandals. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Within days, Amara went from victim to hero to the face of a movement against elite impunity. International news outlets picked up the story. BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, they all wanted interviews. But Amara didn't feel like a hero. She felt terrified. Her face was everywhere. Her name was on everyone's lips. Reporters found her village, interviewed her mother, dug into her family history. Some people called her brave, a warrior, a voice for the voiceless. Others called her a thief who'd stolen documents, a manipulative woman who'd planned this all along, a tool being used by Chief's political enemies. The attacks were brutal, especially online. People questioned her motives, her character, her background. Chief Okonkwo's lawyers painted her as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta, someone who'd fabricated evidence to destroy an innocent man's reputation. But the evidence didn't lie. The EFCC's investigation corroborated everything Zainab had reported. Bank records showed millions diverted from the foundation. Emails revealed Chief coordinating with accountants to create fake expense reports. Testimonies from former employees described a systematic operation to defraud donors. Chief Emeka Okonkwo had spent 15 years building an image as Africa's most generous philanthropist while quietly stealing from the people who trusted him most. The twist. In late October, just as the case seemed straightforward, a bombshell dropped. One of Chief's former business partners, a man named Alhaji Ibrahim Suleiman, came forward with a shocking revelation. He claimed that while Chief was guilty of fraud, he hadn't acted alone. According to Ibrahim, Chief's entire inner circle, including 3 board members and 2 high-ranking government officials, had not only known about the scheme, but had actively participated in it. More explosive was Ibrahim's allegation that one particular board member, Chief Nambi Azakibe, no relation to the historical figure, had actually masterminded significant portions of the fraud and was now attempting to frame Chief Okonkwo to protect himself. It was a revelation that complicated everything. Was Chief Okonkwo the mastermind, or was he also a pawn in a larger game? Had he orchestrated the fraud, or had he been manipulated by people even more ruthless? Prosecutors scrambled to verify Ibrahim's claims. They subpoenaed more records, interviewed dozens of witnesses, dug deeper into the foundation's 15-year history. What they uncovered was even more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The fraud network extended into state governments, federal ministries, and international NGOs. Politicians had taken kickbacks. Government officials had approved fake projects. International donors had been deceived repeatedly. And at the center of it all was indeed Chief Azakibe, a quiet man who'd stayed in the shadows while Chief Okonkwo took all the credit and, eventually, all the blame. The trial. The trial began in early December 2024. It was one of the biggest corruption cases in Nigerian history. Chief Okonkwo, Chief Azakibe, 3 other board members, and 2 government officials were charged with fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. The Federal High Court in Lagos was packed every day. Security was unprecedented. Protesters gathered outside daily, some supporting Amara, others still loyal to Chief Okonkwo, claiming he was being persecuted by jealous rivals. Amara was called to testify in mid-December. She'd been dreading it for weeks. Not because she feared telling the truth, but because she'd have to face Chief Okonkwo again, face his lawyer's questions, face the judgment of millions watching. When she walked into the courtroom, silence fell. Every eye turned to her. Chief Okonkwo sat at the defense table, looking diminished, his expensive clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight, aged years in just months. He didn't look at her. Amara took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth in English and Igbo. And then she did exactly that. She explained how she'd noticed inconsistencies, how she'd taken photographs not to blackmail anyone, but because something felt wrong and she needed to understand what she was seeing. She described the documents, the conversations she'd overheard, the meetings that stopped when she entered rooms. Chief Okonkwo's defense attorney tried to shake her testimony. He questioned why she'd waited so long to come forward. He suggested she'd been paid by rivals to fabricate evidence. He implied she'd stolen documents illegally and was therefore a criminal herself. But Amara didn't waver. She answered every question calmly, in a quiet voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. And then the prosecutor asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Miss Okafor, why did you do this? Why risk everything to expose Chief Okonkwo? Amara looked down at her hands, calloused from years of hard work, then looked up at the packed courtroom. It wasn't just about me, sir, she said softly in English mixed with Igbo. It was about every person who donated money they could barely afford because they believed it would help a child go to school. It was about every family that was promised their daughter would get a scholarship. It was about the truth. And if I stayed quiet, if I took the money and disappeared, I would be just as guilty as the people who lied. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the defense attorney had no response. During a recess, something unexpected happened. One of the prosecutors approached Amara with new information. They'd uncovered evidence that Chief Azakaib had been planning to testify against Chief Okonkwo, claiming that Okonkwo had forced him and others to participate under threat of professional and financial ruin. Some of the evidence supported this claim. Emails showed Chief Okonkwo pressuring board members, making veiled threats about exposing their personal scandals if they didn't comply. It complicated the narrative significantly. Amara was torn. She hated what Chief had done, how he'd treated her, how he'd stolen from vulnerable people. But she also believed in complete truth, not convenient truth. So when prosecutors asked if she'd testify about the full scope of what she'd seen, including evidence that might complicate Chief's guilt, she said yes. It wasn't popular. Activists accused her of protecting a billionaire. Social media exploded with accusations that she'd been bought off after all. Even Zainab questioned whether this was wise. But Amara didn't care about popularity. She cared about honesty, the kind her father had taught her, the kind that didn't bend based on convenience. On January 15th, 2025, Amara took the stand again. This time, she presented the complete picture. Yes, Chief Okonkwo had participated in massive fraud. Yes, he'd benefited enormously. But Chief Azakaib and others had been the architects, and Chief Okonkwo had been both participant and, in some ways, victim of a system he'd helped create but didn't fully control. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it more fully. The jury deliberated for 5 days, the longest in recent Nigerian legal history for a corruption case. When they returned on January 20th, 2025, the courtroom was so packed that hundreds stood outside. The verdict was nuanced. Chief Emeka Okonkwo was found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, but acquitted of being the primary conspiracy architect. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay back 2.5 billion Nigerian nairas to the foundation and victims. Chief Nnamdi Azakaib and 2 other board members received longer sentences, 15 to 18 years each. The government officials took plea deals in exchange for testifying against others in the network. But the story didn't end with the verdict. In February 2025, 2 weeks after sentencing, Amara received a letter. It had been delivered through official prison channels, and when she saw the sender's name, she almost threw it away. It was from Chief Emeka Okonkwo. She stared at the envelope for hours before finally opening it. The letter was handwritten on simple line paper, 3 pages long, written in surprisingly neat handwriting. Chief Okonkwo didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses or claim innocence. He simply told his truth. He admitted that he'd known exactly what was happening, that he'd chosen to look away because the money, the power, the respect, the image of being a great man had become addictive. He admitted he'd been weak, greedy, and cowardly. And then he wrote something that would stay with Amara forever. I spent 65 years building a lie, and it took you 8 months of quiet observation to expose it. You could have twisted the truth to make me look worse or better. You could have taken the money and disappeared. You could have testified only what benefited the narrative people wanted. But you didn't. You told the complete truth even when it didn't benefit you, even when it made people angry at you. I have lost everything, my reputation, my freedom, my legacy, and I deserve it. But you, Amara, you gained something I never had despite all my wealth. Integrity. Real integrity, the kind that can't be bought or sold, the kind that stands firm even when the whole world is shouting at you to bend. Thank you for seeing me as I truly am. Not the monster everyone wants me to be, not the saint I pretended to be, but the complicated, flawed human being I actually am. You gave me something I never gave anyone else, the truth. Amara read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it away. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. But somehow, that letter gave her closure she hadn't known she needed. 3 months later, using money from a book deal and speaking engagements that she'd initially resisted, Amara started something new. Not a charity that promised grand things, but a practical organization focused on legal aid and support for domestic workers who'd been abused, exploited, or silenced by their employers. She called it the Invisible Voices Initiative. The name was deliberate. For too long, people like her, maids, drivers, cooks, gatemen, security guards, had been invisible to Nigerian society. Their labor made comfortable lives possible, but their humanity was rarely acknowledged. Their voices were never heard. Now, Amara was determined to change that. By June 2025, the initiative had helped over 400 people. Maids who'd been abused, drivers who'd been cheated of wages, cooks who'd been sexually harassed, gatemen who'd been blamed for crimes they didn't commit. All people who'd had no one to turn to, no money for lawyers, no voice in a system designed to protect the powerful. Amara didn't do television interviews. She didn't seek celebrity. She just worked quietly and steadily, the same way she'd always worked. But this time, she wasn't invisible. She was seen, and her voice, the one she'd kept silent for so long, was finally being heard. As for Chief Emeka Okonkwo, he served his sentence without seeking media attention or attempting to rehabilitate his public image. When he was released in 2037, he moved to a small town in Enugu State, not far from where Amara had grown up, and lived quietly. Every year on the anniversary of the slap, he made an anonymous donation to the Invisible Voices Initiative. Amara never acknowledged it publicly, but she knew, and in a strange way, it was enough. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. That actions have consequences. That truth matters. And that sometimes the people society deems powerless are the ones who change everything. So let me ask you something. If you were in Amara's position, what would you have done? Would you have taken the 5 million naira and walked away, used it to transform your family's life, justified it as taking care of those who depended on you? Or would you have exposed the truth, knowing it might destroy your life, make you enemies among powerful people, subject you to attacks and scrutiny you never asked for? And here's the harder question. How many times have you seen injustice and stayed silent because speaking up seemed too costly, too risky, too complicated? Think about the people in your own life who serve you. The house help who cleans your home, the driver who takes your children to school, the security guard at your office, the waiter at your favorite restaurant. How often do you really see them? How often do you treat them as human beings with dreams and dignity and voices that deserve to be heard? Amara wasn't special because she was brave. She was special because she refused to disappear, refused to let anyone make her invisible, refused to let power silence truth. And maybe that's the real lesson here. That power isn't just about money or status or influence. Real power is about visibility, about being seen, about refusing to accept that your voice doesn't matter because your bank account is small. This story isn't just about a billionaire and a maid. It's about all of us. About the choices we make when no one's watching. About whether we choose comfort over truth, silence over courage, convenience over conscience. It's about recognizing that the people we overlook every single day might be the ones who change the world, if only we'd stop long enough to actually see them. So what do you think? Was justice truly served? Did Amara do the right thing by telling the complete truth, even the complicated parts that didn't fit the simple narrative? And what about Chief Okonkwo? Does 12 years in prison and a lifetime of regret make up for 15 years of systematic fraud that hurt thousands of people? I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me. Would you have done what Amara did? And if you had donated to Chief's fake foundation, believing you were helping children get educated, how would you feel? Would forgiveness be possible, or would anger be your truth? If this story moved you, if it made you think about invisibility and power and truth in new ways, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, stories that don't look away from difficult truths, that don't simplify complicated realities, hit that subscribe button. Because there are more stories out there. More people like Amara. More truths that need to be told. More invisible voices that deserve to be heard. Thank you for reading. And remember, the most powerful thing you can do in this world is refuse to be silenced and refuse to let others be silenced either. Your voice matters. Use it.